Hello, I'm Ellen Sturm-Niz, and welcome to our final and third in the series Elevate Artists discussion. I'm the director of Amos Eno Gallery, a nonprofit artist-run gallery that has been supporting artists for more than 50 years in New York City. And we have 25 member artists from all over the United States. And one of those artists, Julianne Nash, whose solo show Flora Non Grata opens at Amos Eno. We have the opening reception tomorrow night, actually. It's up right now. Julianne is monitoring our Q&A feature tonight. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please type them into the Q&A, and we'll reserve time at the end of our session to address as many of your questions as we can. Tonight, we're thrilled to have three professionals who bring unique perspectives to sustaining a creative career through curation, art fairs, funding, and more. This Elevate Artist series is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Let's meet our panelists. We have Melissa Burgos, Managing Curator of the Julie and Edward J. Minskoff Collection. James Miille, fine artist, curator, and co-founder of the Superfair, formerly known as the Superfine Art Fair. And Kelly Olshan, artist and learning program officer at the New York Foundation for the Arts. Welcome to you all. So let's see. I think tonight, let's start with you, Kelly. We met a few years ago when I was serving on a grant panel for a local arts council. And now you're at NYFA, a nonprofit service organization that offers a lot of arts programs and opportunities to the creative community in New York. And I'm wondering, because there are so many wonderful options out there for artists to explore, what is your advice about how emerging artists can become more strategic about what opportunities they pursue in terms of residencies, open calls, solo shows, group exhibitions, all that jazz?
Yeah, so I think there are as many different definitions of success as there are artists. So as you're approaching this landscape of arts opportunities, I think you have to start with what is your goal? What do you want? What does success look like to you? And there can be as many definitions of that as there are artists, and there's infinite amount of right answers. And so I think it first starts with, okay, of all these categories, what is it that I really need and want in this moment? What is aligned with where I'm going as an artist? And that's partly about the fit, right? Like, is this something that reflects your aesthetics, your interests that you're sincerely excited about? But also where you are in your career. So, like in terms of categories, maybe you have this incredible studio space, or in my case, a full-time job that makes it really hard to take off work and go somewhere for a residency for 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, maybe residencies aren't the right fit, aren't your priority right now. And maybe it's about you really want to show your work and build your network. And so exhibitions then become a good fit for you. And then narrowing down from there, getting, I think, as specific as possible to ensure that alignment. So to extend the example of exhibitions, if the goal is really to show, then okay, what spaces really make sense with your work in terms of how you want to show it? Is it public spaces? Is it, corporate lobby spaces? Is it gallery spaces? Is it non-traditional spaces? And then from there, here are the ones that I'm really excited about, whose programs or exhibitions reflect my work, who have shown artists that are kind of reflect where I am career-wise, and getting as specific as possible from there. I think as artists, myself included, like we can be such big picture abstract thinkers that we don't always kind of hone in on the specificity. But the more that you can do that, the easier it will be to prepare something that is really thoughtful, that speaks to the specificity of why this place, why is this thing a good fit for you, which will ultimately make your application stronger.
It sounds like artists might like need to think about it as a real career plan the way you would any career if you were
Mhm.
wanting to be, the CEO of a company. You want to be the CEO of your own company as an artist. So you have to kind
Mhm.
of build out that 5 year business plan about like where do you want to see yourself in 5 years maybe, and then what are the steps you think will lead to you getting there?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Um, James, you've worn multiple hats as an artist, a curator, an arts fair organizer. Um, I think that one of the things that artists have trouble with when defining those goals is how to shape their personal brand and that feels authentic and not like overly commercial or artificial. How would you suggest, based on your own experience and working with other artists, how someone can go about defining or communicating their unique identity and story?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Superfine or Superfair, still getting used to the new name. Superfair basically started in part as inspiration when I was navigating my own art career. And then in turn, having helped so many artists and being around what so many other artists are doing, I in turn have also gained experience from Superfair over the years. And so as far as it comes down to branding, usually when someone thinks of a brand, right, they're probably thinking something like Coca-Cola or something that is with a logo and everything. But any public facing business, like you're saying, like if you want to be that CEO, you're the CEO of your own art business. It's the same with branding where you are creating this narrative, everything that you do from your Instagram profile to the way that you frame your art or the way that you talk about your art, your artist statement, every single thing is feeding into that story, that impression that people have of you as an artist. And so just because it's something that you should be thinking about doesn't mean that it has to come off like, oh, I'm going to make my art similar to Coca-Cola, right? You want it to be the story of you as a person. And I think that really the best place to start in order to keep it authentic is make it about yourself. If there's certain sectors of artists where it makes sense to have like an artist name or something, especially on for certain media of art. But beyond that, it should still be where you are at the core of your practice. Even if you work with galleries, even if are, maybe a little more behind the scenes. Your brand really should start with you. And if that is the core that you're starting with and everything is branching off from there, like you can create a mission statement for your art. You can create a team for your art. Like you can do all the things that a business does, but if that story is starting out with you and what you're bringing to the world through your own art, that's going to be a really good starting place to stay authentic and still create this brand that's going to be communicating what you want with people.
Melissa, for an emerging or mid-career artist, I can imagine that one of their goals as a business in their 5 year plan might be having their work acquired by a collector, because that can be an incredibly meaningful moment in their career, financially, of course, but also just as validation that they're being valued by a quote unquote gatekeeper in the industry. As the managing curator of a private art collection, what do you see that collectors are really looking for when they're drawn to a new artist, especially one without a big resume yet? Is there some kind of brand or authentic story that resonates?
Yeah, in thinking about this conversation, this talk, and sort of preparing for it, I actually spoke with my boss. He and his wife. I'll just give a brief, short description if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So I'm the managing curator of the Julie and Edward Minskoff collection. And Mr. Minskoff is a building developer here in New York City. And over the last 40 to 50 years, he and his wife have amassed an incredible art collection comprising of almost 1,000 pieces of art, mostly post-war, modern, contemporary. Um, and due to the nature of his business, the artwork is in a combination of both public spaces such as building lobbies, parks, out on the streets. Chances are, if you've been in Manhattan, you've encountered some artwork in the Minskoff collection, and also in their private residences. And like I was saying earlier, in thinking about this conversation, I actually spoke with the Minskoffs about this. And um, as far as what draws them to a particular piece of art or an artist, they each, so it's Mr. and Mrs. Minskoff, and then they have a son who's maybe borderline Gen Z millennial age, but he's also a collector. So it's really been quite interesting to hear this from a sort of like old school perspective, and then like a new school, younger perspective. But each of them said the same thing, that they felt that there had to be an emotional response to an artwork or to an artist. And yeah, to your point, um, it really seems to also be about making the connection. Each of the Minskoffs have said that they've connected in the opportunities that they've had to connect with an artist, whether it was at an art fair or at a gallery opening, or maybe they just ran into each other in a social setting. But it really enhanced the experience and sort of allowed for an opportunity for the artist and the collector to meet. And, maybe some deals were made from that.
Um, for all of you, and as an artist is thinking about building out their career and what kinds of things they need on their CV or resume, social media, website, what do you, I mean, obviously it's going to be different depending on what their ultimate career goals are. But what do you think matters most in terms of exhibitions, the types of venues that they're showing at, the consistency of their work, if they're using a lot of different media, how do they navigate that situation?
I
Kelly?
actually think that for most arts opportunities, having been like a frequent panelist for residencies, exhibition grants, I don't think most people are looking at the resume and CV, looking for a blue chip and saying, oh, well, they've done so and so residency, so we can trust them, or are there, blah, blah, blah. And I think this goes counter to the larger narrative and also like artist instincts, and that we often feel like we have to, speaking as an artist myself, like validate ourselves that we are worthy, and look for that blue chip. And I think that comes from a couple places. One, that we live in a society that grossly undervalues artists in every sense of the word. And so we end up having to say, okay, well, if I get so and so thing, then I can prove to myself that what I'm doing is worthy. And I don't think that's really the approach that I would recommend. If you need someone to tell you that what you're doing is worthy and you are contributing to society by making art, I will do that any day of the week for you. And I think us as artist workers should be doing that for artists. So I would think of it more or less about like, I have to have this thing in order to get this other thing, or in order to prove to myself that I'm valuable. Because frankly, there's easier ways to do that. But really lead from this place of like, what do I want? What are my interests? What am I excited about? And who do I sincerely like working with? And
Mhm.
then moving from there. And I think perhaps counterintuitively, if you approach it that way, you're actually more likely to get the thing. There are some technical tips that we will get into later, but big picture, I would say, chase your goals, your definition of success, what's right for you, and what you're sincerely excited about in specific terms, rather than, oh, I have to have this thing because it's prestigious, because that is a never ending well.
I think that's a good point that just because something is prestigious doesn't mean it's right for you because you might not like that situation. It might not be actually something that speaks to you. Um, James, as you've been navigating this from all different sides, like art fairs are such a complicated thing for artists to know whether they should participate in them. Do they need, a gallery? They want a gallery so they can participate in certain fairs. Should they fee-based fairs? How all of these different ones. How would you recommend they incorporate art fairs into their process of being on the scene?
Yeah, I would say that art fairs can have different purposes depending on where you're at in your career. I think that especially for a more emerging artist who maybe they are having that trouble and just quickly on the CVs, like I was going to refer back to what you were saying before, Kelly, about think about what it is that you want to be doing. And uh, maybe if you're like the only thing I want to do is I want to get into, the Whitney or something like that, then you're that's going to have a different set of steps to get to the Whitney. If you're like, I love creating my work, I want it in as many homes as possible, then that's going to be a different set. And so I think that where art fairs come into play, if you are looking to have year-round opportunities where opportunities are coming to you and you're kind of facing that challenge at the beginning of I don't have anything on my CV. How do I get anything on it? Art fairs can be a really good place to start in that regard because they do show that you're serious about your art and that you're treating it as a profession versus a hobby. And it's going to get the attention of gallerists. I can tell you right now, doing a gallery show on my own, one of the first questions that a gallery asks me is, do you have collectors? Do people buy your art? And you might think that, oh, at the gallery, that's their job. I make the art and then the gallery has the collector list. You also need to have collectors. You need to have that Instagram followership. Unfortunately, like all of the above, it's a collaborative effort when you are working with a gallery or really any organization. And so if you're looking for a starting point, art fairs are a really good place to start. Another nice thing is, certain exhibitions might be more for that prestige, right? If you're taking those steps to get to a museum, right? You might choose to do certain things for your career that are not selling art. It might be where you're putting a lot of work into something and maybe you're going to sell a few pieces, but it's really more about getting that on your CV. And I would say that with an art fair, people tend to come in that day with their wallets out and they're like, okay, I want to walk away with something here. And so if you're looking to build your collector list, that is one of the main things, whether or not you have a strong CV or not. If you're like, I want to be increasing the number of collectors I have, art fairs are a really good option. And the last thing I'll say right now is just think about what is going to be good long term because there are better and worse options out there. There are ones that really feel more like pay to play or it's you're not even going to want to put it on your CV versus if it has a good reputation. If the artists around you, if you're excited to be in a show where the other artists around you you also like and they feel like your peers, so to speak, then that's the right art fair for you. If you're like, oh my God, I'm the best thing here, that can be good for sales, but that's long term, that's not going to be as good. So.
Melissa, how often would you say the Minskoffs are finding things at art fairs? And if they connect are interested in an artist via their story or inspired by their work, is there something on their resume that would be like a turnoff or something that they're looking for to say like, yes, I do want to buy this person's work?
Yeah, so art fairs are fairly important to the Minskoff's overall collecting. I believe that they're turned on to a lot of new artists via art fairs and even new gallerists and other entities that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to. And it's sort of like this one-stop shop, right? Like I'll just use, if they're in Miami, for example, they can sort of see everything that's happening in one space. And yeah, it's a fairly important aspect of their collecting. That being said, it's not the only way that they're exposed to artists or galleries, but it is probably the densest, richest, most one of the most important. And as far as artists, I have to say it's not very often since I've been working with the collection that they're looking at an artist's CV. It really is, at least in my experience working with the Minskoffs, they have a really close network of friends, colleagues, dealers. Like I said, Mr. Minskoff's been collecting for like 40 or 50 years. So he's developed really excellent, close relationships with all sorts of people in the local in New York and global art world. And I have to say that for him, he relies pretty heavily on word of mouth. A certain dealer or gallerist or artist that he knows recommending another artist goes a long way. And he'll more often like be looking at, let's say another artist that he's close with is telling him about an artist. He will, look at what the artist is showing him, maybe some images on his phone, rather than looking at his resume or something. So at least in my experience working with this particular collection, it's sort of word of mouth and if their network is kind of vouching or telling them about an artist, that's kind of where they are getting this information from and learning about new artists.
Kelly, in addition to your role at NYFA, as you mentioned, you're also a professional artist, and you're balancing that with a full-time job and doing all of that hustle. You had mentioned that you have different seasons, of what you're focusing on in your artistic practice and work life, that kind of like follow your creative rhythm. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works and why you would suggest other artists consider that?
Yeah, so this is a trick and tip that I picked up from another artist, actually a NYFA fellow. Shout out to Brigida Ferrati, who also runs a residency. And basically, it was born out of I was feeling really overwhelmed and inefficient. So in working full time and trying to make art, which realistically happened, after hours or on weekends, I was trying to do a lot of things at once within the artist's realm. So everybody here listening that's an artist will be able to relate to this, is that, okay, you're trying to make the stuff and look for opportunities and apply to things. And then before you apply to things, you got to document the things. And I was trying to do all those things at once. And it was really wildly inefficient, because what would happen is I would make something, I'd kind of be in my head about it because I know that I wanted it to be, I'm already thinking about how I want to be ready for a show or to get me that external thing that I'm looking at. I would try to take a photo or two of it, edit it myself, submit to the thing, and then realize, no, I really need to work on this more. And so I'm working on it more and I document it again. And it was just really not working very well. And, as artists, we are sole proprietors, we're small businesses where you're wearing a lot of hats at once. And so I got this tip from, the mentor who said, I would recommend thinking about it in seasons. And so this did a couple things for me. It's more efficient, but it was also helpful from a psychological perspective in that I could leave all of the kind of analytical stuff. I don't know if I want to curse on this podcast, but or this panel rather, but you leave all that crap outside the studio door, focus on making, get to experiment, and that's more creatively productive. And then when you're done making, maybe it's 3 or 4 months or whatever makes sense for you, then you pause, you document, maybe it's yourself, maybe you hire someone, then you have beautiful photos that are ready to go and you can enter your season of applying and you're going to be more competitive because you have a cohesive, nicely documented body of work. And so it's just a way to do one thing at a time. And I found it's been so much more helpful, but also more effective. So I pass that on to anyone. And it might be informed by opportunities. Like right now, I'm prepping for a show and I cannot even think about applying to anything. I really just need to be making and focusing on making that work as great as possible. Then I will document it and then I'll be in a position to start applying for things again.
Yeah, I think artists can feel really like they're being torn in so many different directions because they're supposed to be posting on social media all the time and marketing themselves and networking, but then also like in their own bodies and brains and making this beautiful work that like is, you know, speaking to them through some magical spirit. And it can be hard to switch from one brain to the other. When there are things like social media or those like more daily or frequent things that you need to do, how can you like kind of separate them into tasks that don't get in the way of your creative process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pressure and creative guilt to constantly apply for things with an inundation on social media, and there's constantly opportunities. And so even saying from the outset, I'm letting myself off the hook. I'm not going to worry about applying for things for 4 months can
Mhm.
help mitigate that unhelpful or unneeded creative guilt. And it goes back to like setting your priorities and defining success, as we talked about from the beginning.
Yeah, I think we can feel as artists that we're gonna miss that one opportunity that would have made our break broken. I can't, that's not the right phrase. Um, it made something happen for us, but there's probably not just one. It's probably there's many different ways that somebody could get to where they're going, and being sane when you get there is just as important. Um, I think in terms that we're talking about branding and being authentic and to your vision as an artist, can any of you give an example of either yourself or an artist that you've worked with, like a really good branding message or artist mission statement that someone has come up with and stayed true to, and how that kind of has helped guide them through residencies, grants, exhibitions, things like that? I'm going to go to James. James, I'm going to put you on the
Yeah,
spot.
yeah, no, that's go for it. I'm trying to think of a specific example of someone. I think I can probably speak to myself a little more quickly.
Sure, go ahead.
I would say that I previously was a little all over the place, and I would say in certain aspects I was a little too casual, and in other aspects I was treating it a little too brandy. It was like, I felt like I was taking the the personality out of it a little more, and it was a little too official for being an artist. And so I think that sometimes taking that step back and setting everything up, I would say if anything, it might start with a mission statement. It might start with you know think about what it is that you want to be doing, beyond just like, oh, I want to sell art, or I want to make money, or I want to be famous, whatever. Think about it a little more big picture. Think about what matters to you. Think about what your art is about. All of those things, they'll feed into each other. Either you'll have a very strong sense of what matters to you, and that might start forming what your art is all about, or vice versa. You might be like, I don't really know what I want to be doing with my art. But I'm really passionate about my art itself, and so then what you create for your art might feed into that. For me, I had this long creative block. It was a few years long. I would say primarily because I we were so busy with the fair, that I had to put my art on the back burner a little bit. And so I needed to have that reset moment for myself where I was like, okay, I need to rethink what it is I'm doing. And so for me, it started out um, with renewing my art, with the creative exercise that I was doing for it. So now all of my art is associated with music. Every photo that I create starts with a song that is meaningful to me, and then I am creating a visual that is not so much what the song is about, but more what the feeling is I get from that song. And so I ended up through this creative exercise. This is what my art is all about. And then now everything from like the collections on my website, they stemmed from that. Like I have these very like vivid collections that the names of them and what they're about, it feels like you can almost step into a room that would have that entire collection. And so That's something that stemmed from what my art was about. And now this is the story that I'm telling everyone that becomes my brand. And I end up selling my work oftentimes because someone loves the story behind it and they love or they love the song that was the inspiration to it. And so when you really hone in on the brand for yourself, you'll end up having more connection points that that potential collector or a gallerist or a writer for an arts publication that you're speaking with, there's going to be more touch points that they can resonate with your work. So it'll just feed into everything, selling your work, getting written about more, having more opportunities come your way, getting accepted for something that you're applying to. So yeah, don't discount it. And also hone in, hone in on what you're doing.
Yeah, Melissa, what do you think are some artists the Minskoffs have recently collected who had like a story that really resonated with them, and what was that story?
This is so interesting. And on the one hand, I want to like spill the tea and like name names and say stories. And on the other, I'm like, oh, gee, I probably shouldn't be so specific. But there are um, a number of pieces in the collection that the Minskoffs have acquired. And, at first glance, maybe the piece itself is not one that I personally respond to or don't immediately get. And then I will discover either from the Minskoffs directly or from the dealer that helped coordinate the deal or for whatever, I'll learn. I will learn that, maybe the Minskoff spoke to the artist directly and I'll hear the story behind the piece. And and that's eventually what, sort of pushed them to acquire the piece or at least be more attentive or attuned to it. And then I think about this and historically, some of the most successful artists are also like incredible storytellers and they have an incredible sense of self. They know who they are, they know their brand or their vision, and they're also incredibly apt and talented at articulating that. Um, so to speak specifically, I'll just name maybe the biggest contemporary artist, but an artist like Jeff Koons, for example, he's well represented in the Minskoff collection, and he's certainly not emerging or mid-career. It's not entirely relevant to this conversation, but
He
there
was
are
once
some.
emerging, I suppose.
Yeah, he was once emerging and once mid-career, and so maybe, but he's, the art itself, it's been talked about to death. We don't need to parse that out. He's also incredibly good at telling a story about the piece. The mirror balls, the blue mirrored balls, they are what they are. But if you ever hear him speak about these, there's this incredibly rich tapestry of stories about reflecting and seeing yourself in them and how it's like you and God. And I mean, it makes your head spin, but it also got the attention of these collectors. And, the Minskoffs happen to be, like I said, huge Jeff Koons collectors. But sometimes I think that it's the talent and skill of the artist to not only make the work, of course, it's about the work, but also be really good at describing it.
I think that, yeah, that's a great point. I think artists can sometimes feel like they want to make their artist statement very general so that everyone can kind of understand it, but actually that makes it less accessible for people. That kind of the more specific an artist is with what inspired them and what a work is about, people then extrapolate from that and develop their own connections based on that story, like, oh, that reminds me of my own story or someone I know. Kelly, do you have like an elevator pitch? If somebody says like, "Oh, you're an artist. What's your work about?" Like, how do you have a branding statement that you can share with us?
Oh, I absolutely have one. I have I think that everyone gets asked, oh, you're an artist. What do you make? So I think you should have the like just informal, I'm at a bar in an elevator, one sentence or like really brief version. For me, that's I make 3D imagined landscapes that reference imagined architectures. I didn't say it perfectly there, but just super brief. And then if they want more, then you have more. And going back to branding, I think, or marketing, we live in a world where most people that interface with your work are going to not see it in person, but are going to see it online. And then that will dictate whether they decide to see it in person. So then building off what James said, it's all about how are you representing that work, and how are you representing your practice, whether that's in an artist statement, on social media, Instagram, on your website, documentation, etc. Yeah, I think you should have your one sentence version. You should have, 100-word artist statement is what we recommend, in bio. And that just articulates who you are, what you do, how you make it, and why you make it. And I do think that should be something that is understandable to everyone. Like we definitely recommend avoiding art speak, but it's something, as Ellen said, that is specific and rooted in your practice. I can talk for hours about artist statements, and I do if you want to attend that workshop, but it's really like rooted in your practice. Like when I read an artist statement, I want to have a vision of what the work looks, feels, smells, whatever, like, and rather than like avoiding generalities, like if I read one more, like, ever since I was little, I was inspired to paint. It's like, yeah, okay, we all were. Or like, really vague generalities. Like, don't be afraid to get, as Ellen said, like specific and rooted in what is exciting about your work and specific to your work, and ideally in like sensory language and the specific things that drive you.
To all of you, James specifically, maybe in terms of an art fair, but also in putting together your own solo exhibition, what should artists think about when they're maybe putting together a booth for an art fair or a solo exhibition to make their work stand out, and attract the attention that they're looking for, whether that's from a collector, from a gallerist who's going to give them a show or include them in a group show? What advice would you have about making, setting the stage for your art in the best possible way?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I would say you definitely need to think about what that type of venue is. So an art fair, for instance, versus a gallery. In a gallery, if it's a solo show, you are the only artist there. It's in a room that someone's able to walk around. And so, the spacing between the art, everything like that is going to be a lot different. Versus when you're in an art fair, oftentimes it's okay for the work to be a little tighter, not floor to ceiling, for the love of God, ever. But you can have the artwork, a little more in a commercial presentation, I would say. Now, the other thing is, no matter what, even in that more commercial presentation, there is a power in being selective with what you show. And I can tell you, as an artist, Kelly, I'm sure you can tell us too. It is really hard when you've made a ton of work, you want to show it all. And every piece is important to you, and every piece is important. But being able to, and again, this goes back to the branding, if you're able to tell a story by the way that you are showing the work together, that's only going to further strengthen what you are trying to share with the world. If someone is able to see an overall thread to what you are doing, they're going to be more likely to buy a single piece. And I think that a lot of artists, they get anxious that, well, what if I don't show this one piece and that's the one that XYZ person would want to see? If someone is going to buy your work the story to your work is really going to be what resonates with them. And if you're in the middle of a conversation with someone, you can always have a piece like in the gallery's closet or in the storage space of an art fair. You can, and that's a really great opportunity to help the person feel even more special. You're taking the time to like go and show them something private and it feels really special and everything. So use that to your advantage instead of feeling like you have to have every single piece on display. You'll find when you narrow down and curate, it really uh, is stronger, the presentation.
Melissa?
I just want to say to James's point, collectors love VIP treatment. It goes a long way.
Yeah, you want to like hold some stuff back so that you can bring it out just for the special people. Yeah.
Yeah, super exclusive just for you. I'm not showing this to anyone else. It goes a long way.
100%, 100%.
How should artists consider asking other artists' friends for help when putting this information together, making their artist statement, curating a show, putting their art fair booth together? Because it can be so hard when you're in your own world to think about what is really important to put out there, what does make the best presentation. What would you suggest people do to like get advice from outside sources?
I think a second pair of eyes is always helpful. I think the answer might depend based on the specific category that you just named. Like you might want to, if you're doing an exhibition, for example, it might be helpful that someone has a visual sense or a little bit of context or background and maybe exhibition design or showcasing, putting that together prior. I think with artist statements, someone who doesn't have a background in the arts actually can be quite helpful because they can control for that sort of art speak or, does this make sense? Can someone follow it even if they, don't have a PhD in art history? Because ultimately, you're not trying to prove how smart you are or earn a PhD in art history. It is a vehicle, it is a tool to bring people closer to your work. And then in terms of artist statements specifically, there are so many great resources out there. Free NYFA has workshops and online articles, and there's plenty more from other art service organizations for people that can give you tips.
Should you ever ask ChatGPT to write your artist statement?
I don't think so. But also, you're going to waste a glass of water every time you do it.
That's true.
Also, there's a lot of really bad artist statements, and I think ChatGPT is just going to feed back the bad and the cliche that we're trying to get away from anyway. That's my take.
And also the generalization that we were just talking about, like ChatGPT will make a very general statement about your work. One other thing I was going to say on the topic is it is very much a skill set to be open to critique of your work. I will say as someone who has struggled with asking people for advice and just wanting them to say, no, it's perfect, thank you. That and so one, if you're going to ask for advice, be open to what someone's saying. And generally, even if you're not asking, try to be receptive because usually the person is only trying to help. And then on the flip side, because you also can't necessarily do what everyone is suggesting if people have like opposing opinions. So I think that be confident in your own beliefs and where you're at in what you're doing. So be very appreciative of that advice that you're given, but also don't feel like you have to do every single thing that someone tells you. If there's a thing in your brain that's saying, well, but I think the way I did it is actually pretty good, like, you're one of the opinions you should be factoring in.
Melissa, you mentioned obviously art fairs are important where collectors can find new artists as well as word of mouth. What are some of the other ways that artists could make connections with potential collectors of their work? Reaching out to somebody like you who's managing the collection. How do they find people like you? Who do they send their press releases or their emails to sort of start those conversations? And what's the best way to start the conversation that will lead to a good result and not be a turnoff?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I've been working with this collection since 2021. And this is something that I am also wondering about. I'd love to meet more artists. I'd love to engage with them more. And I am wondering from my position and my perspective, well, how do I meet artists? How do I connect with them? Um, I will say that I've been cold emailed and cold called a few times. And in other circumstances, previously I had worked at a gallery and at an institution. And in those capacities, I was a bit, well, first of all, we weren't allowed to accept submissions um, and cold calls. But in this particular role, the couple of times where an artist has reached out to me directly, I've found it really awesome and refreshing. And it's actually led to some wonderful relationships and some projects. Um, and again, I think it's in the capacity that I'm working in where it is managing a private art collection, but a lot of the art is in public spaces. I don't know how to make myself known to people. So when people are able to find me, I'm just like floored by it. And like I said, it's led to some really wonderful projects and scenarios. So that being said, I don't, I wish I had an easy answer, but I think that in the times that artists have found me in this role, I think that they have found me by literally doing research and being curious. The one or two instances that I'm thinking of, it was art in the Minskoff collection that was in public spaces, and the artists went to the doorman or somebody related to the building and asked them about it and got the name of the collection and then looked online and then found that Mr. Minskoff. So it was a lot of work on the artist part, but shout out to them. And it has led to, like I said, some really wonderful things. I don't exactly know how to make that happen, but I would like to say to everyone listening and to the group here, I'm totally available. I'd love to share my email address. I'd love to hear from you and putting myself out there. So yeah, long story short, artists did, they did the work, and they did the research, did the work, and found me.
When someone reaches out to you, what is it that you would want? Like, would it be a turnoff if somebody said, I have this great work that I think they should buy, and they are like obviously trying to sell it to you? Or is it, I'm interested in the collection that you manage, and if my work might be a fit for it? Is it just a link to their website? Is it their social media? What are the things that would make you go like, oh, okay, this person is someone I want to continue to have a conversation with because of the way that they're approaching me?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's not like one scenario is right. It really is piece by piece. In one case, actually, in several cases, an artist has cold reached out to us, and perhaps it was their tone. They had called and emailed and didn't get a reply, and they were very persistent, and that was a total turnoff. And so we, you know, the Minskoffs and the company had put them on a do not pick up, do not call, like blocked list. I mean, as much as you can in 2025. But in another situation, an artist reached out to me and noticed that Mr. Minskoff was developing a building in a neighborhood where their studio was in. And they just happened to look online and do some research and see that the Minskoffs have this fabulous collection. And they put themselves out there and said, I happen to be like a mural artist. I see you have this wall. I work with a lot, not only am I an artist, but I have this whole community of artists in the neighborhood that you're building this building in. Could we link? And I was really moved by that artist's approach. And then I also liked their work, and it has led to something. So yeah, I can't say that there's a right way or a wrong way, but if you're so inclined to reach out in the first place, just be thoughtful about your approach. Do a little research into who you're reaching out to, maybe know something about them, and think about how you could fit, or how your work might like fit within their collection.
Yeah, I think I have so many thoughts on this, if I
Yes.
may. I think that research and relevancy piece that you pointed out, Melissa, is so key, because in the positive examples you gave, it wasn't, here's my portfolio, please give me an opportunity. It's, I did something really thoughtful and research-based. I understand something specific about this collector, about their interest, about real estate they're developing, and I'm speaking specifically to that. And I think that is so key and what makes for a successful outreach. So in my role, I also get a lot of kind of cold calls or reach out. And I'm definitely open to it because I'm there to support individual artists. But to extend that theme, let's say, okay, so New York Foundation for the Arts, or NYFA, does professional development. We do grants, we do services. And so if I get an email that says, here's my whole portfolio, or here's a project I'm working on, can you present it? It's like, we're not a presenting organization. Like, I've had emails addressed as if we're a gallery, and it's like, we're not a gallery. If you had spent 2 seconds on our website, you would know that. I want to support you, but like, spend a little bit of time understanding what my job is and what my role is and how I can support you. And then that's more worth my time. So for example, I run a program for artists called Artisanpreneur. If I got an email that said, hey, I looked at this program, I'm really interested. I have a question, or can you shed light on, what a good candidate might be? I'm going to respond to that email every single time, not just because I care, I do care, but it's also my job. And so rooting it in that. And then the other kind of general tip or takeaway I would give is that you're not going from 0 to 100. The dating analogy comes up a lot in the arts. Like, you're not asking someone to move in with you on the first date. I think a little bit of like, we've never met, but here's my portfolio. Can you buy my work, or can you give me a solo show? Is kind of like proposing on a first date. I think often, and as we've talked about throughout this panel, the arts is so deeply relationship based, and relationships build over time. And so, to extend another example, I don't work in a gallery, but typically those who do, it's like, you get to know each other. There's an interest in the work through a studio visit or online. Maybe you attend some events together. Then maybe they have one piece in a group exhibition and that does well. And then maybe it's a 2 or 3 person exhibition. And then maybe it's a solo. That's a very linear, kind of obvious example, but some version of that, of like relationships building over time, and rooting it in who they are and what they actually do through a little bit of research and intention.
I'd love to chime in on this too.
Yes, please.
Everything you're both saying is just like, yes, yes. But what I would say, kind of chiming in on what you were saying, Kelly, if you're reaching out to someone, make sure that it's easy for them. Like, if you're helping them do their job, like knowing what it is that they're looking for and having those questions answered. Like, for instance, if you're reaching out to a publication, something like that, they're gonna need images, they're gonna need a story. So if you give them images and a story, then that's gonna make their job so much easier. And then very much just like putting an extra point on what you were saying, Kelly, like if um if you are just reaching out to someone for something that's going to benefit you, then it's what is their incentive? So reach out to them, letting them know why it's going to benefit them that you're meeting up, or that they're going to start getting to know you, or that you're going to work together. And then last thing I was going to say is just I think it's totally okay to be assertive. You shouldn't be soft pedaling and kind of like the whole what's the thing, like if not, no worries, right? Like that whole mentality of here you go, but like don't worry, like if you don't want to, you should be very assertive in what you're doing. But same with the dating example, like if you're like, hey, I think that we get along really well, and would you like to go on a date? That's being assertive, but it's also not saying, hi, I love you, can we get married? So it's being assertive, but also not being too strong right off the bat.
Can I give a quick add to that? I think that the other thing that you could potentially offer them is just a sincere interest in their work, or that making them feel smart and important. And what I mean by this, okay, I don't think being inauthentic. I'm saying if someone reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I followed your career. I see that you've balanced being an artist and, working for a nonprofit full time. I'm interested in doing the same. Can we go out for coffee? I'd love to, get your advice." I'm not getting anything out of that, but I always say yes because they get who I am. They're sincerely interested, and it makes me feel like I have something to offer them, and I want to contribute to the field and support someone when I can. And so that can be enough too. It doesn't have to be like, quid pro quo in the traditional sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's there can be like very tangible or intangible benefits for someone, right? It might just be that, I mean, for the case of a collector, I mean, one thing that collectors love is having a relationship with an artist that makes them feel special. And so something that I always try to offer collectors is like, by the way, like I'd love to go get coffee with you. And the coffee is the benefit to them. Like they get to hang out with me, like I'm an artist.
It's
So,
also a date before you get married
right, exactly.
or whatever. Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah, yeah. Like a date before, they're gonna buy something. And so yeah, it doesn't have to be where it's like, hi, I want you to show my art, but you're going to get this thing in return. Like it doesn't have to be something super specific.
Yeah, Melissa, we're talking about collectors in terms of just them buying people's work, but there are other ways that collectors can often support artists in terms of, just helping them with connections. Maybe it's not right for their collection, but they know someone else who might be interested, or they have connections with gallerists, museums, or maybe are able to, while not purchasing a work, maybe help fund a residency or something like that. What are your experiences? What do you know about like other ways that collectors can support artists?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you've just said and more. Um, no, it really is to keep going back to the dating analogy. It is a relationship as much as both the collector and artist are like wanting and willing. In my experience in working with the collection, the Minskoffs are quite generous with regards to their collection and the artist in their collection. They loan pieces out to museums, to institutions, schools, etc. And there have been times where, maybe not purchasing an artwork outright, but again, network, referencing, word of mouth, they will tell their colleagues, friends, and family about an artist that they met. And maybe they're the artist and that person have connected. So yeah, it isn't always about a fully transactional experience. Like I bought your work. There's all sorts of other aspects that relate and connect.
I think some artists could also be intimidated by collectors, that they feel like these very fancy sort of high tier person. Do you have advice for artists about how to kind of overcome that fear of like, oh, I don't know how to talk to this person or behave?
It's so tricky because um, everybody is different and sort of what Kelly was saying earlier. It's sort of about knowing your audience or at least vibing them out, sussing them out. Um, on the one hand, I would say if you see my boss in public, don't go up to him and maybe don't. He's like an old school New Yorker. He's got a sassy attitude. He's really direct and to the point. He's hugely successful in a lot of ways because of that personality, but also it can be a bit intimidating or, but He's like I said, an old school New Yorker. But on the other, to James's point, there is a lot to be said about having the confidence and sense of self and belief in yourself to go up to a collector and say, hey, I know your collection, or I'm aware of you, and I really think that I could be a good fit. That can even be an approach like that could be and has been both disarming and welcoming, and it kind of breaks down this barrier in a way. But ultimately, I think, like Kelly and James have both been saying, it's best to sort of gauge it, feel it out, suss it out. But don't be afraid to speak to someone genuinely, authentically, and meaningfully.
Kelly, as artists are looking at trying to build a sustainable career, one where maybe whether they have a full-time job or just to be able to have the resources to have a private studio, buy the art supplies they need, all of those things, how can they think about pricing their work if they're going to sell it, or getting grants and other things that can help them have the financial stability to be able to pursue their creative practice?
Yeah, it's a big question. And I think pricing work is sort of a different topic than grants. I can try to speak to both of them. Um, in terms of pricing work, I have recently been introduced to kind of a somewhat, at least new to me, methodology that I don't think is out there, but it really speaks to sustainability and sort of starting from your North Star of where you want to be and reverse engineering from there. So, for example, maybe you are like many artists, maybe you have like diverse streams of income and there's a particular project. And in order to be where you want to be, maybe pay yourself, pay your expenses, etc., you really want to be making like $10,000 from this project. Then, and I'm going to use a simple rudimentary example for the example, but you want to make $10,000. Say you have 10 pieces, then each of those pieces should be worth $1,000. And so it's a little bit of a different thought process rather than, okay, thinking about, square inches and formulas and all of those things, but really it's this practice of like, where do I want to go and what do I need to get there? Some other general tips. I think that just referring to my notes here, always making sure that you, whenever possible, are paying yourself. So in the context of a grant, it's building in a line item for your artist fee. 20 or 30% of a grant is typically standard, and reviewers look well upon that. I would also say be wary and even avoid working for free. Or if you decide to donate your time, being really intentional about what you're looking to gain from it, whether it's something to learn, an experience, a relationship. So for example, I volunteer, I'm part of the advisory committee with Department of Transportation's public art program. And I volunteer my time because I want to learn more about public art, both for myself and to advise other artists. But it is typically standard to be compensated for things like panels. And if I get invitations where there's not compensation offered, I borrow something that another artist I learned. I'll say, thank you so much for the invitation and for thinking of me. Unfortunately, I have met my volunteer hour quota for the quarter. And I have said that before, and often they will come back and be like, I'm so sorry, we can offer you this stipend. And, we shouldn't have to do that. But I think as artists and arts workers, we do have to kind of educate and advocate for ourselves, and that often even well-meaning people, and unfortunately well-meaning people in the arts, either don't consider or are unaware of or don't have the bandwidth to consider the real costs that it takes to make art. And to that end, the last tip I'd say is to negotiate. I have never accepted a job offer without countering and asking for more money. And I think you can do the same as an individual artist. And as long as you do so respectfully, like, for example, I have gotten an invitation to do a solo show. It was application based, and this was a local place that wasn't used to working with artists outside of the immediate area, which I was. And so I was going to have to rent a U-Haul and days of installing, taking off work, not to mention making the stuff. And so I put together a budget and I showed, this is what it's going to cost me to do this project. Can you cover my expenses? And then here's my artist fee. And they did it. And it doesn't always happen. And that's why we shouldn't have to advocate for ourselves. We should just be paid what we're worth. But that's not the world we live in America, in the arts. But I think, sort of articulating your value, understanding it, and to the powers that be, I think that can go a long way, as often people on the other side also work in the arts, and so they want to make it happen, and if they can, or worst case scenario, they say it's not possible, but I think if you do it in a respectful way, there's nothing to be lost, and then it's up to you to decide, is this something that is financially feasible for me? Is this in line with my goals? And go from there. So you're being intentional about what you take on rather than being exploited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, James, what advice would you have for artists about building out, their pricing of their work, or thinking about how to price their work at an art fair versus online and things like that?
Yeah, what I always say is it's always easier to increase your prices than decrease your prices. So, you know, as far as what price makes the most sense for your work, especially if you're starting out and you're really trying to get a sense of where your prices are. I mean, there's a certain point where numbers are going to start to feel very abstract and made up. So you have the market, right? The market where you're trying to figure out where your pricing makes sense. Eventually, the price of your work is going to end up also being relative to itself and how it's growing. And so, Kelly, everything that you were just saying, I think is a really good starting point. I think whether it's, you're calculating like what your time is worth or like what your goals are with your work, or if you're doing square inches, whatever the method is, there's a lot of different ways. Ultimately, the price that makes sense is the price that someone's going to buy your work at. And so, you know, I see kind of this threshold where if your work is priced at a certain point and it's selling really easily, like someone's like not even thinking, they're like, oh, of course I'm going to buy it, it might be priced a little too low. On the reverse, if you're saying the price and they're immediately like, oh, no, no. And they like, you might even get like a chuckle if the price is like far too high. The person might be like, what are you saying? That's ridiculous. And so where I like the price to be is where there's a little bit, it's a decision for the person to make, but they ultimately buy it. That means that there's just enough friction, enough decision making that's going on to where it's like, okay, um, it's not a no, right? I'm not immediately turned off. Let me think about it. And the person ultimately decides, yes, this is worth it. I'm going to buy it. I want this enough that I'm going to spend that. And what I would say is keep your prices there until there's a life event, a milestone that happens. That can be physically, you get a really good, reputable gallery exhibition. You're in an art fair and you're going to have a slight price increase when the art fair happens, and you can use that as an opportunity. Hey, I'm going to be exhibiting in this art fair in 2 months. This is the last chance to get my work at this price. You can send a newsletter out, you can post on social media. And not only is that kind of like a built-in, selling opportunity, but also it's this shout out to everyone that, hey, I'm progressing in my career. I'm going from emerging to mid-career, or I'm going from mid-career to super well established. And so using your pricing as sort of these milestones. The other thing is it doesn't have to be an exhibition. It could be that I am selling out of my work really quickly. I'm a photographer, and so I had a slight price increase when I started selling out of editions like fast. And so I was like, oh, okay, something has to happen here. And so that can be the life event that happens instead is that you have the demand and you need to do something about your supply. Again, art is, just because it's something that you love to do doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't treat it the same way that we treat any other kind of business. And back to the authenticity, it can remain authentic even though you're being business savvy with your work.
Melissa, can you give us any perspective from the other side of the equation, as someone who's on the side of purchasing work, how to think about how you think about prices or a collector thinks about prices and what artists should know about that?
Yeah, to everyone's point, from a collector's perspective, um, we're sort of meeting you where you're at. In my experience, when the Minskoffs have acquired new works, there's only been, again, it's so specific to them and to their collection and their relationships. But if they're interested in acquiring a piece by an artist and the artist tells them how much the piece is worth, there's a difference between when we're acquiring directly from an artist versus a gallery. And just to be direct about it, with an artist, the Minskoffs are like, yes, okay, you're telling me what this piece is. I want it. So yeah, sure, here it is. Whereas with a gallery, there's sort of almost like an expectation of negotiation or a discount, regardless of the price, regardless of everything. I think that the collectors I work for, and I think this could be said across the board for all levels, they all consider themselves a VIP. And part of the VIP experience is like negotiating a discount. Like, of course, I know that this is the set price point, particularly with a gallery, regardless of the gallery's size or, access to funds. They're like, there's an expectation of a discount or at least some negotiation. But again, it really is, it's piece by piece or artist by artist, and it really does depend on the situation. And I've seen it both ways where, like I said, they're willing to pay the price that is determined. And then also, I'm not going to buy this unless I get a 20% discount. So it really just depends on on the situation.
Um, let's see, we were talking a little bit about, in addition to pricing, but getting grants to help build a sustainable arts career. And Kelly, you've obviously been on many grant panels and worked for nonprofits. What are some of the mistakes that artists make when they're applying for grants or professional development programs that and they're not getting the support that they were hoping to get?
I love this question about common mistakes and pet peeves, because when you're on the other end and you're reading thousands of them or hundreds of them and you see the same mistakes over and over again, you're like, please let me tell everyone so they know. Okay, so in terms of grants, and this goes back to artists are often like kind of abstract thinkers or very much trained. We're trained to think about like the concept and kind of the heady theoretical piece, and that's often what excites us. But oftentimes, in the context of a grant proposal, particularly a project proposal, so there's unrestricted grants and then there's project grants. Unrestricted is, you're a fabulous artist, keep doing what you're doing, here's some money, do whatever the hell you want with it. NYFA fellowship is like that. You can go on vacation, you can pay off your credit card bills, you can do whatever you want. Those are rare, so most are project grants. So in the context of project grants, which is, I have a particular thing, an exhibition, a show, or whatever, I'm asking for money to do that thing, and it usually has some sort of public component. So you're describing something specific. And often I will read pages of this proposal and I will get to the end and I will be like, what is the project? I do not know. So tell us in really specific, basic, unartsy terms at the very beginning, just the basic who, what, when, where, why. So it could be, I am, seeking support to do a performance in this Queens venue or in Queens. It's going to be 2 hours long and it will, is a choreography and it will support 5 dancers. Whatever it is, just in really concrete terms. I think also, and this is expanding more to like professional development programs, but this includes residency. This applies to residencies as well. Tell us your rationale for participation. Like, why do you want to do this program? Again, I think we're trained as artists that like the quality of the art is the end all be all. And if the work is incredible, you'll get all the things. But in the context of like a residency or a professional development proposal, we want to know, like, why do you want to do this program? Like, what specifically about the program, whether it's access to a community or facilities. Maybe you really want a woodworking or welding studio, or maybe, you're going to get to meet Ellen and Melissa and James, and you're really excited about that. Whatever it is, like, tell us specifically, what is it about this thing that will support your career, speaks to your interest? And to put this in context, often with these reviews, the panelists are given scoring criteria. So it might say, Ellen has been a panelist for me before. So we might say, Ellen, how strong is this person's rationale for participation? Score it from 1 to 5. And if in the whole proposal, you don't really answer that question, you have like a sentence, or there's nothing that really speaks specifically to why we want to do this thing, Ellen's probably not going to be in a position to give you that high of a score, even if she loves your work. So speak to that. Often it's an explicit question. So if people ask an explicit question, answer it. If you have a budget, make sure it balances. So you have $3,000 coming in, $3,000 coming out. Revenues equal expenses. And lastly, people really confuse artist statement and bio. They're two different things. Artist statement is about your work, and a bio is about you. And so I don't want to hear about your career and the objective facts in your artist statement. That's the bio. Just talk about your art in the artist statement.
Yeah, Kelly,
I could go on, but
yeah. I would also suggest, I mean, there are many grant panels that you can apply to serve on. Some of them even pay. You get a stipend for participating. And I think all artists, if you are able to, should be on a grant panel. You will learn so much about how to make your own applications better, because you generally are reviewing somewhere between 25 to 40 applications probably over, at least.
Could be hundreds sometimes too. Yeah.
I think a lot of the panels, they kind of break it down a lot, like in the middle, but you're reviewing a lot of applications in a short period of time, and then you're getting on a Zoom with other panelists to talk through them as fast as you can, and you've already given it the rubric, and you're trying to debate it all out, and you realize like what you need to have put in there to really grab someone's attention, to make it super clear what you're talking about. And then you realize like what made one person's application stand out to you and someone else's not, and you go, oh, that's what I need to be doing when I apply for a grant. It's such an amazing opportunity to be on the other side of it. I highly, highly recommend it. There are so many opportunities out there. So, and James, do you have experience with grants and applications for residencies, and what advice would you give?
I have a little bit. I think that I can give a little more general advice here on just when you're applying for really anything. Is first off, try to put yourself in the person's shoes. So I think that that's like you're saying, if you can be on a grant panel, or if you can be reviewing something or curating something, whatever it is, then definitely try to get a sense of what that person is going to be thinking about and considering. Other thing is when if there is a very organized way of submitting for something, probably again, uh, exercise a little bit of empathy and think about what that person is having to go through for their job. And so if someone has a system where they are receiving submissions and they can sit down, they can go through submissions that way, and then all of a sudden you're this person coming in a different way, and you send an email with a PDF that doesn't have the information that they need to review. That's you know that's just going to be a headache to the person. Like, they're going to have to review your submission a fully separate way, and most likely they're not even going to review it. They're going you will be lucky if they are even taking the time to reply to you and say, "Hi, can you please submit here?" And so again, that goes back to making it easy for them. Do the thing that they have blasted out into the world. This is how we want you to submit for this thing. I do think that it can be good if you submit through that thing, and then you find where that person is active. Either they have their email listed. Most likely, if someone has their email listed online, it means that they're trying to receive emails. And so either email them, or you see that they're active on Instagram, you send them a message saying, "Hi, I just submitted for your grant. I just submitted for XYZ thing. I'm really excited. I think that I'm going to be perfect for the project." Something like that. Yeah, go ahead and send them a message. You'll stand out. But submit the way that they're asking you to submit. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Um, I know everyone is always looking for anecdotes, either your personal anecdotes or of people you know, something that you've seen an artist who was trying to make it and something happened. They did something that led to a change in their career trajectory. Um, if you have any examples of stories like that, we'd love to hear them. I know that's kind of a big question.
I have an example of someone who's actually on our podcast. And forgive me, I'm fully blanking on his name, but really cool artist. And something that he said really stuck with me because he basically said that it took him 10 years to become an overnight success. And so he got really huge on Instagram. He was actually a guest of ours on our podcast twice in like a year and a half. And the first time he was on, he was giving very different advice because the second time he blew up in that time. And so uh he had something like maybe plus or minus 10,000 Instagram followers, which is pretty good. But he kind of hovered there. It took him again like 10 years to get to that point. And then in like 9 months, he then had 300,000 followers because something stuck. And it was because he showed up, he put the work in, and putting that work in, something stuck. And then he pivoted, he started focusing more on that. It was like he had oddly satisfying videos of him creating his like very installation heavy work, and it became more installation based because of people really enjoying seeing him create this work. And then he started getting opportunities. People were coming to him with their money ready to pay him because of how big he had gotten. But I think a lot of times artists will be a little jaded in their perspective, where they'll think, "Oh, well, I don't have, I don't know people, right?" Or something where they're like, this, you have to live in this place, or you have to know this person to become a success. And they become very jaded about the process, thinking like, "Oh, I should just have really good work, and that should be enough." And I would say it isn't. I think that again, if you're serious about having a career with your art, not just that you really want to make it, then putting in that work, and it might be where you know that person who's going to introduce you to the person who's going to make your career, but that happened because of years of networking or years of putting your work out on social media, whatever it is. So I love what he said about it took 10 years for him to become an overnight success. Like, put in the work. It doesn't have to be like a get rich quick opportunity.
Um, what advice would you have for artists, like you said, who maybe aren't in New York or LA or some of the big art markets? If you're an artist who's trying to make it in somewhere else, how do you don't have the opportunities to meet people in person at Thursday night walk through Chelsea gallery openings. other than social media, are there other ways that they can get connected to people?
I think that first, just to bring this full circle, it depends on what is making it to you. Like I get to do through my job, like workshops or meeting artists all over the country, sometimes internationally. And um, what is the goal? Like, is it that you want to have 20 hours a week to make your work? Are you really interested in, do you want to share it with your community or particular community, or you'd like to make a certain amount of money off of your art, or um, show it in public spaces, fill in the blank, and all of those things you can do from anywhere, just by living in New York City. I don't think you have to live in a big city to be an artist, or to accomplish your goals, particularly with the advent of, the internet. And there are so many ways. It's really just about building connections, relationships, and pursuing the things that are your goals and your interests. And neither of those are place-based. Um, for example, if you can apply for have a solid portfolio, apply for residencies and travel the world and meet people that way. And maybe you hate cities if you want to be somewhere beautiful or more remote. Or to give another example, going back to, oh, what did I say? um, Relationships. I don't think that you have to convert the entirety of the world or the internet into your fan base. That's one metric of success, but it's not needed. And depending on what your version of success is, I have no interest in being Insta famous. For me personally, I think one or two or three people that really get your work and appreciate it are in a position to give you an opportunity that of interest in you can go so far. Like when I first was kind of starting out and I'd never been curated into shows, I like attended this event. It was like an opportunity to co-curate an exhibition with a nonprofit that I will leave nameless because it ended up being a total shit show. But in doing that, and it was totally just open, I met someone who helped resolve the shit show. And I was just thought she was so smart and I was so impressed by her. And we stayed in touch and we became friends and we had many coffee dates or, stayed in touch and sincerely liked each other. And then she ultimately developed a independent curatorial practice. And because we like working together and she knew my work, she's since curated my work into probably 3 different shows and gave me my first curated opportunity. She was on a panel for a residency, gave me the inside scoop and really encouraged me to apply. And that was my first ever residency. Then I connected to that residency director through her, who is fabulous. I've been quoting her throughout. She was the one that talked about seasons of the career. And she's given me opportunities through that. And so again, like, I don't think you have to, if you're like, I don't know people, I don't know high net worth individuals, who knows if I'll ever be Insta famous? I don't know if I even want that. I think it can really just be about like a few authentic and sincere relationships in line with your goals, and then those build from there.
Definitely. Very good advice. For all of you, but I'm going to start with Melissa for this question. Are online platforms where artists can sell their work individually, or where galleries can sell work from artists online, like Artsy? Are people going there? What do you think of them? Is that a good way to get yourself out there?
Yeah, I think that of course it's a good way to get yourself out there. It provides, I don't know, sometimes you have to pay to participate, sometimes you can do it for free, but it's essentially some of these websites have access to large email lists or curators or dealers, or they just simply have more of a network than you as an individual artist might have. And I think anytime you can have eyeballs, whether they're new or they've seen your stuff before, on your work, I think it's a win. I sort of think it's like a no-brainer that if you're able to put your work on a website, maybe it's a sales platform or a curatorial focused platform, and it fits with your ethos, your artist, your vision, I think that it's a no-brainer and that an artist should certainly take advantage of it. I also know that, yeah, as part of my job as collection manager, we do peruse these sites from time to time. Sometimes it's to see what galleries have on their artsy page. Sometimes it's to see if I'm researching an artist, that's the first thing that comes up. And then I go from there. The algorithm's like, you might like, and then I find myself in a wormhole. But I know that my bosses do the same thing. As for social media, I asked the Minskoff son about this. I have several thoughts about this. Maybe I'll start here. I have a friend that's a gallerist, and he is in charge of finding new artists for the gallery's roster. And pretty much every artist he's found has been through social media. I'll ask them, like, how did you find this painter, this sculptor, whatever? And he's like, an artist DM'd me this artist's work, or so on or so forth. And a bunch of the artists that he's discovered are not based in coastal cities or in big cities. So I do think that there's something to be said for having, and the artists don't have massive platforms. It's not like, anyway, I think that having some sort of social media presence in 2025 is pretty important. That being said, I spoke to the Minskoff son about this, and he told me that he doesn't look on social media for artworks. And he said that it's tough for him to get past the mainstream. He said that the algorithm will often feed him things that, if he's liked one thing, the algorithm's like, you must like this. So he's getting the same thing over and over. And he's like, I'm not exposed to anything new or anything that I'm quite interested in. So I don't use social media to find new art. I rely on my friends or dealers or my network of people. So it goes both ways. But ultimately, I think that the internet, this is such a stupid thing to say, but it's like a great tool for artists to use to market themselves and to get people to see their work that otherwise wouldn't get to.
Let's see. Let me think. Melissa, I have one more question for you. What is something that artists misunderstand about private collectors and collections?
A lot. And even though I work with a private collection, there's a lot I misunderstand about it. There's a lot of, for people that are aware of the existence of private collections, can be a lot of preconceived notions. Sometimes people will get the idea that, a mega collector, so to speak, is like a very altruistic, generous person that loves to donate or loan works or open their collection up to the public to see. That's not always the case. Conversely, there's also an idea that maybe the private collection is like this person sitting on top of like a golden mountain, right? And it's just like swimming in wealth and treasures and jewels and art. There's all these ideas that people have, but also the reality of it is that collectors are real people, and just like us plebes, they want to have an emotional response to artwork, and they often do. They're often incredibly passionate about art and artists, and it gives them life as much as it does the rest of us. So in that regard, like, they're just like us. And I think that that's worth
That is good to know. James, as you've developed relationships with collectors of your work, what is something that has surprised you or something that you've taken away from it that you think other artists should know?
I would say that the thing that is going to resonate with that particular collector is going to differ, but it always comes down to your story. And so sometimes someone wants to know about the process behind your work. Sometimes they want to know about what the work means to you or what it means, what it's supposed to mean. I've had sometimes where a collector is they buy an artwork because I have told them what the idea was that I was going for, and again, like a song or a what that story, what it meant to my life, and they're like, boom, I want it. And then sometimes I'll hear, oh, that's not what I thought. That's not what it meant to me. And so I would say, also going back to what we were saying about like, don't be overly general about your work because it's not going to resonate with anyone. But also don't be too specific about what it's supposed to mean. Like, don't tell someone you should feel this, because it's, leave that breathing room. But ultimately, like, and it can also be about you, right? It might be your story, but ultimately, like you said, Melissa, it doesn't matter if someone is just starting out collecting, or if they are a really seasoned collector. It's not just because you're incredibly wealthy and maybe you are also buying as an investment doesn't mean that you're just going to buy whatever the best investment is. You're still going to buy what you love. And so don't lose that. No matter who you're trying to sell to, make sure not to lose what your work is about and why it's important to you. Because the other side of it is there's a lot easier ways to make money than being an artist. It's not easy being an artist. It is a struggle. So make sure you're not doing it because you think it's a get rich quick scheme or something. Like do it because you love it and sell it like you love it because you love it. So show the world that you love it.
I
I'm
think
always
that is,
curious,
oh, sorry.
artists who, I mean, if somebody buys their work as an investment and then the work goes into storage and is never seen, that would make me so sad as an artist if my work was just like being held until they could sell it again and no one was looking at it. Like we want our work to be seen. We want people to experience the emotions behind it. So um it's nice to hear that collectors like there are people who they're buying it for that reason, and that's probably, there are obviously people who are buying art just like they would buy a stock because they want to turn it around, but there are many people who are buying art because they love art and it speaks to them emotionally. Kelly, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that like James's thought kind of brings this full circle and sort of, even though you're speaking more specifically about the commercial sector selling work, the general advice of like was applying to what I was saying, and that there are easier ways to do this. Like if you are applying to a grant, a residency, you really want something prestigious because it will make you feel valuable. There are easier ways to feel valuable. Like you're just going to be spinning your wheels. So like follow the things that sincerely interest you, not only because it will make your life easier, but also practically speaking, you'll probably be way more successful.
And Kelly, you've had your work shown in public spaces through Shashama. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that has impacted your career as an artist?
Hmm. Well, Shoshama was my first residency. I did their space, Shaw North. So I'm picking up on the last story where I left off. And they also have a lobby exhibition program that's an open call. And so going back to finding the right opportunities for you, I've always been, even though I'm a painter by trade and I've started, making rectilinear objects, it's gotten more and more installation based, and I've always been interested in public art. So I've had my eye on this program because it is a way to bring the work into a public space, and it's right before someone is going to work. So it's that kind of liminal space. And my work is about ambition and transition and sort of even like pressure to constantly pursue and climb. So putting it in a corporate space in Manhattan felt like a really good fit. So example of that. I have a solo show currently on view with Shashama on the Upper East Side. It's up through August. And I actually just got an email earlier where okay, let me back up. The work has not sold. it was something that I wanted to do for that bigger goal reason. And so nothing is sold yet, but the person that curated it, who doesn't even work there anymore, actually just emailed me today saying, "Oh, I'm now working at this other place and I'm wanting to, acquire and place works in other corporate spaces. And I thought of you. I think you'd be a great fit. Send me a price list." So it's kind of an example of how, like, maybe it's not exactly worked out in that moment, but the relationships bear fruit later. And it's a great opportunity to, show my work to people locally. They no longer did receptions. And so I sort of try to be entrepreneurial and design multiple sort of mini VIP receptions where it was like invite only. Ellen came. Thank you.
It was
And
wonderful.
thank you. But, to build relationships with people and show the work to my network, which was more my goal than needing to sell anyway. And, I'll take exhibition shots or install shots, and then those will go in to apply to the next thing.
Kelly, I also recently saw your work at Open Studios in Greenpoint. For all of you, Melissa as well, like, do you go to Open Studios in different neighborhoods? Is that something that collectors are going to as well? How valuable is being part of an Open Studios situation?
Yeah, yes, I go to them as often as I can. I think it's incredibly valuable, and it's not only like for the most part, joyful experience, but it being able to see an artist's space is such a special, intimate, wonderful opportunity. I do go to them just personally, but also in my role as managing curator, I go to them as quite often. I think it's if an artist can participate in an open studio program, they absolutely should.
James, you're in Mexico City right now. Are there open studios in Mexico City? Are you participating in any?
I'm actually not sure about any particular open studio events here. There's art fair circuits, there's gallery hops. Actually a little bit of both. The show that I have up right now on Saturday, Sonamaco, which is basically the equivalent of Mexico City's like Art Basel Fair. They have a coordinated gallery hop that's going to include my show, so I'm really excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. Definitely in New York, though, I go to studio tours all the time. I think that probably just having more of a network of artists in New York and San Francisco, especially, and Miami, I'm familiar with if you know one artist who's part of it, you're going to hear about the studio tours. But yeah, here in Mexico City, I should look into that a little more. But a lot of the artists that I know here are from the art fairs that happen here.
And Melissa, do you ever go to like thesis shows or MFA programs to look at artists there?
I have, but only at the invitation of a participating artist. I haven't crossed the bridge to just go in my own capacity. It's typically because I've known a graduate, but it has been great. And I come to think of it, I've actually made a number of connections and have started following like probably about a dozen artists based on having seen their work in thesis shows. I'm glad you brought that up. It's been a wonderful experience to get to go to them.
Let's see, we're almost at 7:45, so I wanted to check in with Julianne and see if there are any questions in the Q&A for our panelists to answer.
So we've talked a lot about how artists can market themselves in social media. One of the questions is how frequently are you looking at the artwork on the big screen? Are you mostly looking at work on your phone through Instagram? Or are you actually going to take the time to go through to the artist's website and look at the work full scale?
I do both, but I'll say from the open call perspective, so like grants, residencies, or anything where you're like, reviewing applications, it is usually desktop. Usually we won't necessarily go to the website as well as you're asking for a set of materials. And to be fair to everyone, you're looking at what someone submits, but it's always definitely desktop there. And that's the primary way I look at art on a desktop.
Yeah, I would say that probably similar to you, Kelly. I think that when it's something that's a sit down review, it's often almost, I mean, the idea of reviewing a whole bunch of artist work on a phone sounds miserable. So desktop, yes. I think that if it is more about discovery, if you happen to be on Instagram or some other social media and an artist's work comes up, I do when I start to really get into that artist, I will go to their website, and if I then do become acquainted with the artist, like reach out to them, like I love your work, then at that point, then I'm going to be getting to the desktop version. All that to say, have both ready. Have your mobile website and social media and everything optimized. Make sure that there is a mobile version of it, and then also have the desktop version. I think that social media it's a great place for someone to discover you, but I think that getting them to your website is your universe. When you're on Instagram, that is the Instagram universe, which means that the person is going to pay attention to you for 2 seconds and move on. Whereas if you can manage to get them onto your website, they could spend hours on there, or at least more than 2 seconds, depending. So.
Melissa?
And yeah, I would say both. And it really is both, meaning I'm looking at artworks and artists' websites on my phone as well as a desktop. And it really depends on the nature of the conversation. For example, this week is Art Basel in Switzerland. And so I've been getting a lot of text messages with PDFs, images, photos, and it's like a text conversation. So I've been pretty glued to my phone. Whereas in other scenarios, like last week leading up to Art Basel, I was receiving a lot of emails and communications with PDFs of like entire programs, sales lists, whatever. And I was looking at that on my desktop, and I found myself there was a few pieces and artists that I wanted to do more research on. And I in turn, went to Google or went to their website and looked at it on my desktop. But to James's point, I think that having both options optimized for mobile and desktop is pretty key. And if an artist can do that, they absolutely should.
I would say too, as a curator, not just for Amos Eno, but if I'm looking to do independent curatorial projects, I save so many things, so many art that I see on Instagram into my giant Instagram saved folder. I should really come up with different ones for different themes, but I have not ever done that. And if I have a concept that I'm really thinking about, I just keep adding things that I'm like, ooh, that person's art fits in with my anti-materialism concept that I would love to curate someday, and that's going in there. And or if I start to see a lot of art that is speaking to the same thing or in a similar style, and I'm saving that, it gives me ideas for, wow, I think maybe we should do an open call for this because this is speaking to something right now. And then I might individually even reach out to the artist that I've saved and say, I just wanted to make you aware of this open call that we're doing because your work might be appropriate for it. So please consider submitting if you're interested. So I think, and then I will often go to those artists' websites to see what else they've done. Are they, what else are they doing? Is it just this one piece that speaks to the concept that I was looking at, or is this part of a larger body of work that they have? All right, Julianne, anything else?
We've talked a lot about how, as artists, we need to be respectful in a way that we approach galleries and collectors, be respectful of their time, and make sure that we don't contact them out of the blue. So how do we actually go about making a genuine relationship with someone like that? Is it just going to art fairs? Is you're saying see people a lot there?
I don't think that it's about never contacting them out of the blue. I think it's being thoughtful and research when you do contact them and not asking to get married via email. And, I did read this question in the Q&A, and they're speaking, specifically like, is it not okay to, email someone and ask for them to buy a work or to ask for a solo show? And I would say generally that's not a great strategy from the beginning. Like if I don't know you at all, it's likely not going to go from 0 to 100 like cold email to yes, you can have a solo show. And usually if an arts professional is organizing a solo show, there's a context in which that's appropriate. Like there's an open call and there's a means to apply for that. But if your goal is, let's say, to have a solo show at a space, your first steps in building relationships would be research the space, get to know what kind of programming they do, what exhibitions, etc. Who's organizing them? What are their curatorial interests? What is their background? What do they care about? And then if there's an in-person event, you can go to that. But even just in the email speaking to, oh, I see your curatorial interest, or you've done a lot of work in X that's really interesting. I'd love to learn more. Can we get coffee? Or I'm interested in this particular program we manage. Can I ask a question? Or, giving them sort of permission or letting them opt in. Like I think we all like it to be our idea. Like if someone just sends me their whole portfolio unprompted, I'm like, I don't even know where this is going to go. I didn't ask for this. But if you're like, hey, I noticed that you're working on a specific program. I'm interested because X, can I ask a question or can I, whatever it is, and then you're starting to build from there.
Yeah, basically everything Kelly just said. And in speaking as a private collection manager, if an artist wants to approach someone like my boss, I would say basically everything Kelly just said, approach them thoughtfully. It would be helpful if you knew something about them, and if you don't, ask questions, have it be a conversation. Hopefully something like natural and kind and organic can develop from there. And in terms of like where, how, um, art fairs, openings, uh, he's a building developer. He might be in some of the buildings or walking around Manhattan. That sounds a little weird. Maybe don't just like go up to someone. But yeah, basically everything that Kelly is saying, I totally agree with.
The last thing that I would chime in with is um, not every interaction with someone needs to be to for an opportunity for you. Basically, having that relationship building time as well can be super valuable. I have recently, again, like I've gone out to dinner not with any intent to make anything happen, but gone out to dinner with collectors and then they end up they brought along someone else, and then that person wanted to. This literally happened a week and a half ago. This couple from Kentucky, they are now like, oh, we want to buy like 3 of your pieces. I'm like, oh, great. I was just having a good time, and the reason that that is so important is because this is relationship building that we're talking about, being really important for an art career. And relationship building needs to be authentic. You have to actually want to build a relationship with the person. And if you just always seem like you're just looking for what is in it for you, it's not going to get you anywhere. And so genuinely want to spend time with the person. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to go get coffee with every single person that you know, but whatever it is.
Be very caffeinated if you do that.
Oh my God. Yes, no, I've had that at certain times where I've said yes to like 4 coffees in a day. I'm like, wait a second, I can't consume that much coffee. I need to change this. But it can be, and especially if you are somewhere out, you're not in a big city, right? Maybe for you, engaging and building that relationship is maybe you're going to interact on social media. Maybe you're not just wanting them to like your posts. Maybe you're going to go and you're going to like their posts and you're going to send them a message that isn't always just, hi, do you want to buy my art? Or hi, do you want to come to my show? XYZ. Because then when you actually have that message, the fifth time, right, where it is asking for something, then they're not going to feel like you only want something out of them. They're going to be like, oh, we're friends, and now you're asking something. Absolutely, I want to support you. I'm following along, and I love your art, and I want to be there for you. Um, a quick little anecdote is I just finished chemotherapy a couple months ago, and so thank you. I'm in remission, yay. But I had a moment where I needed to go out and ask people for donations because I had to like pay for all my medical expenses out of pocket and everything. And the fact that I had been engaging with my audience, and whenever someone on social media, like messaged me, I messaged back. When collectors like called me not for anything, but they wanted to just talk to me, I was very happy to talk for 20 minutes, even if there wasn't a sale at the end. So by the time that I was going on and saying, hey, I'm I'm in a weird life situation. I could use some help. And I've had like at least half of my medical expenses paid for by donations because I had those relationships with people where I wasn't always wanting something. And when I needed something, they were there. So
That's wonderful. I mean, the artist community can be so powerful and so generous and so wonderful, which is really great. And we're so glad you're doing better.
I'm doing great. So
Julianne, are there any other questions?
I think we covered the rest. Let's see.
Okay. One thing, we talked a lot about grants and a little bit about residencies. For someone who's applied for a lot of residencies and hasn't been accepted, where could they figure out what's going wrong, what they need to be changing about their application to be more successful in the future?
Make sure your work samples are solid. If you're a visual artist, you get 10, and you really want to be thoughtful about curation. We don't have super time to get into that, but there's a lot of resources online. NYFA has articles, and getting a pair of eyes, another artist friend, or someone who has been successful getting residencies to look at how you're approaching that. Really, generally speaking, one cohesive body of work is great in the context of applying to a residency and exhibitions, rather than kind of going from one body of work to another. So cohesive, nice, curated. Look at your artist statement, should be 70 to 100 words. Answer key questions. Again, great resources online. Again, have an artist friend look at it. And then lastly, make sure that you can get a sense of how competitive the thing is. I often hear from artists like, oh, I applied for Creative Capital, or I applied for Skowhegan and Yaddo, and like insert like these really, really prestigious residencies or opportunities. And it's like, the reality is that there is probably a 0.01% acceptance rate for these things. And so it's not that you're a failure, or it's not that you're not a great artist. It's just, these are hyper competitive. So think of it, do some research to see how competitive it is for residency specifically. You can look at Alliance for Artist Communities.com. Look at the profile. You can see how many people applied and how many were accepted. And make sure you're being thoughtful. I like to use the analogy of applying for college. If you really want to go to college, even if you're brilliant, don't apply to 7 MITs. Like, you need a couple reaches and a few meets, so that you're, doing your research to like have a sense of like, applying to things that are meets as well.
Yeah, and I think Kelly, before you mentioned too, if you're applying for a residency, like why are you applying for that specific residency, and what are you hoping it's going to change about your practice or give to your practice, so they understand what you're hoping to achieve by it. And I think, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't NYFA, like, they can hire coaches to like review applications, like not maybe for NYFA programs, but for any application. So if anyone out there needs more advice, you can always go to NYFA, and you can actually hire somebody who has a lot of expertise to review an application and maybe help increase your odds.
Yes, I'm a NYFA coach. We have a roster of 18 professionals. You can book a one-on-one session with us anytime, year round.
All right, well, we are at 8 o'clock, so our time together is at an end, but I wanted to thank all of our panelists, Melissa, James, Kelly, for participating in this great discussion. And thank you to Julianne for your help and to the audience at home for joining us tonight. We have video recordings of our first two panel discussions are already online. And I will be posting this one online as well, either maybe tomorrow if I get to it, or next week at the latest. And you can go to amoseno.org/elevate to view all of the webinar recordings. Plus, if you haven't seen, we're having an in-person networking event at the gallery on Thursday, June 26th. Melissa is RSVP'd. I think Kelly is also RSVP'd. James is sadly in Mexico City, so he's too far away.
I'm so sad I'm not going to be there, but everyone have fun without me.
Thank you. And Julian's work will be on view in Amos Eno Gallery during this special event. And we also have work by Adam Cable and our newly opened The Project Space, which is our cellar gallery space. And there will be exhibitions on view at our neighboring galleries, Underdonk and McBride Dillman. So RSVP, excuse me, is required for that event. And you can go to the link in the chat, which Julianne just pasted in there, to register. You can also find out all of the information at amoseno.org/elevate if you don't get a chance to click on that link before we close the webinar. If you found tonight's talk helpful, please consider supporting Amos Eno Gallery. We're a nonprofit artist-run space, and even a small donation helps us continue offering free programs like this. So Julian is also sharing our donation link. And we know we have a lot of engaged, talented artists in the audience tonight, and we are always looking for new people to join our community. We do currently have one membership space open. So if it sounds like that's something you might be interested in, you can find out more at amoseno.org/membership. All right, thank you guys. It was a wonderful night. I appreciate your expertise and your time. So have a wonderful night, and thank you, everybody.